Hi there, I'm Scott. Welcome back to my Decades of Action Challenge series. I'm dressed like this because I'm making this video right before I go to work, as usual. Every Friday I post a new video in a series that is inspired by the Epic Film Challenge by Forkerball and Razor Wire Reviews. They were doing this whole series, and Luc, Razor Wire, is still doing it. Which they look at entries from a book called 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, and making videos about them after they watch the films. My source material is different. It's called A History of Violence, an essay series by Tom Breihan for avclub.com. Breihan is writing about what he considers the most important action movie of each year, starting with Bullet in 1968 and moving forward to the present. And I am on 2009. I've been making guesses about what movies Breihan would nominate. I thought he'd write about Avatar, but he didn't, because he doesn't consider it an action movie, apparently. He wrote a little bit about it for his essay, but he didn't focus on that one. Instead, he focused on a direct-to-video sequel to Universal Soldier. Universal Soldier is a 1992 film directed by Roland Emmerich before he made Stargate and Independence Day and Godzilla and all his disaster movies. It's a kind of science fiction-y action movie. Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme are the main characters, a couple of, 80s and 90s martial arts stars, who play basically Vietnam soldiers. They're fighting for the American Army in Vietnam, but they get killed. They actually kill each other. Dolph Lundgren is a sergeant. He goes a little crazy. He's paranoid and thinks that every single Vietnamese they come across is a traitor and, an agent of the Viet Cong. He kills some innocent people. Van Damme tries to stop him. They end up killing each other. Fast forward to the early 90s, in which their bodies have been reanimated through a special new scientific process, and they have been created as super soldiers. Very durable, very strong, very fast, quick to heal, and very, very, very obedient. Mindlessly obedient. They have code names and code numbers instead of actual names. GR44 and GR13, I believe, are their code names. So when they are called in to resolve a hostage crisis, they do with a smashing success. But then they start to get their memories back. Their memories start to come back in. They start to adopt their old attitudes. Dolph Lundgren's character becomes a psycho once again, and Van Damme, it's up to him to try and stop him from doing bad things, which he's unsuccessful for most of the movie. He ends up fighting him and running away from him for a lot of the picture, but eventually he does get the better of him. And now we have a sequel. There were actually a few sequels to this movie, but Breihan writes about a movie called Universal Soldier Regeneration, which came out in 2009, and it was a direct-to-video sequel, and it's actually really good. It's better than the first one, actually, better than the original film. It takes place in Chernobyl, mostly, in the Soviet Union, the abandoned nuclear power plant that had a meltdown. There's a terrorist group that's taken over the plant. They've taken a couple of hostages, the teenage children of the Ukrainian president, because they want the Ukrainian president to release political prisoners that are in his custody. And if he doesn't, they'll kill his kids, and they will detonate the abandoned reactor that still contains a lot of radiation and release a radiation cloud. So the military, the Americans, are like, you know what, we need to get the best soldiers, so we will bring our new generation of Universal Soldiers, these, mindlessly obedient and very, very tough, reanimated, dead people, to try and stop the problem. But unfortunately, the bad guys also have a Universal Soldier of their own. They call him an NGU, a Next Generation UniSol, and he is played by Andrei the Pitbull Arlovski, an MMA fighter. The Pitbull is the name that you go by in the ring, I guess. But he is on the side of the terrorists, who are led by Zahari Baharov. Sorry if I'm pronouncing his names badly. He plays a character named Topov, who is leading the terrorists, the hostage takers, and making the demands. And he has on his side a character named Dr. Colin, who's played by Kerry Shale, who is overseeing the NGU and taking care of him and fixing him up when he gets hurt. And in addition to their band of armed guys, they have the NGU there to protect the detonator from being deactivated. You know, anybody who comes across the NGU, he's just a goner. So the Americans are like, okay, what are we going to do here? We've got our own army, we've got the Ukrainian army and everything like that, but they're no match for these guys, especially the NGU. So we need to bring in a universal soldier, an experienced veteran universal soldier, to take care of these guys. And so they find Jean-Claude Van Damme, who plays a character named Luc Deveraux, same character, of course, from the original Universal Soldier, who's being cared for by a Dr. Sandra Fleming. She's trying to reintegrate him into society, trying to get him to behave normally, because that doesn't come easily to him. A lot of the humor from the first film comes from him trying to, deal with normal situations like sitting in a diner and eating food. Very difficult for him because he's used to doing one thing: fighting bad guys, killing bad guys, and then sleeping. They have to sleep a lot. They have to cool down because the process to reanimate their bodies causes them to overheat, so they need to, go into a chamber and sleep and cool themselves down for the next mission, so they don't die. So anyway, they call him back in, and it looks like he's not going to have to do anything because the Ukrainian president caves and agrees to release all the political prisoners that Topov wants. So Topov's like, hey, we won, this is great, and his men start celebrating. But Dr. Collins like, no, we can't have this. I need to demonstrate my NGU on a world stage so that I can get the money to fund my army, So it just so happens that he has Dolph Lundgren in his back pocket, or at least a clone of the character. Dolph Lundgren played a character named Andrew Scott, a sergeant, and he got completely diced in the first Universal Soldier. Van Damme put him through a thresher, basically, so he's nothing but a big pile of bloody chunks at the end of the movie. But he's back, they cloned him, they turned him into a Universal Soldier, but unfortunately still has the same mental instability, so he almost immediately exceeds the control of the poor doctor. So the terrorist leader dies, the doctor dies, and now Van Damme has two NGUs to deal with rather than just one. So the rest of the movie is him being called into action to go to Chernobyl and find these guys and rescue the kids and, destroy the NGUs, and so it's just basically a lot of fighting after that. It takes the situation a lot more seriously than the first Universal Soldier. Universal Soldier has a lot of humor, some of it good, some not. But yeah, it's more a lot more joking around in that one, whereas this is more serious. And it's a decent film. Not a particularly memorable one for me because it's basically just nothing but fighting. I prefer more variety in my action movies. But if you're looking for a lot of good combat sequences, a lot of good hand-to-hand stuff, it's a good one to check out. A lot of guys really like movies like this and like John Wick, where there's just lots and lots of one-on-one fighting, and less emphasis on like vehicular mayhem and things like that. Yeah, it works fine. It's a decent film. It's directed by John Hyams. John Hyams is the son of Peter Hyams, who directed a couple of 90s Van Damme movies, Timecop and Sudden Death. Peter Hyams actually is the DP, the director of photography, on this movie, but John Hyams is the director. He also did another Universal Soldier movie called Day of Reckoning, which I haven't seen, of course. He did a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie called Dragon Eyes. That's about the most noteworthy things on his filmography. Yeah, not a lot to say about this one other than it's just basically a showcase for a lot of fighting. One other character that I didn't mention is Mike Pyle. Well, actually, that's the actor's name. He plays Captain Kevin Burke, and he's a particularly good combat soldier. And he actually squares off with the NGU, the most evil NGU at one point. So it's basically, you've got, in the beginning of the movie, you've got the kids getting kidnapped. That's one set piece. Then you've got the NGU laying waste to the soldiers. And then you've got a series of one-on-one fights. You've got this guy, Captain Burke, versus the NGU. You've got Van Damme versus Dolph Lundgren, and then you've got Van Damme versus the NGU at the end, and the whole thing is resolved that way. So yeah, a whole series of big elaborate fights, and they're pretty good. They're pretty decent. Not that I'd recommend this movie to any non-action fan. really, there's not much to it other than just, guys fighting each other. But, the fights are good, so it's okay. But yeah, aside from that, wouldn't say it's a must-see. Yeah, that's Universal Soldier, Regeneration, one of Breihan's picks. The next one from 2010 is a South Korean film called The Man from Nowhere, a movie that I haven't seen, like this one. A movie I'd never even heard of, actually. So my task before a week from now is to try and figure out where I can get a copy of this movie and watch it so I can make a video about it. And if you'd like to see more videos of mine in this series, the link to my playlist is below, as is my Facebook page. You can also, of course, read Breihan's article on the film. He talks a lot about how, the direct-to-video market really sort of exploded in the early 2000s, and more movies just got released direct-to-video because it was so much more financially sound than putting it in theaters and putting a whole marketing campaign behind it. Instead they put them out on video. It's a lot less expensive as far as the marketing distribution goes. So they end up making more money that way, especially for, lower rent titles like this. Guys like Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, they headline these movies, theatrical movies, in the 80s and 90s. And now they're, more just, it's a lot more low profile. There hasn't been many Van Damme movies in the theaters. Guys like Arnold and Sly, they're still, making films that hit the theaters. The next one that Arnold's doing is sort of a satirical movie. Kind of a mock doc. I think it's called Killing Gunther. Yeah, a lot of these guys that were big in the 80s and 90s, they're just mostly just doing direct-to-video stuff now, and apparently that's working for them for the most part. This is one of the better examples, Breihan feels, of a direct-to-video action movie, a solid meat and potatoes action movie that gets the job done, even though it isn't like reinventing the wheel or anything like that. That's the video for this week. Thanks very much for watching, and I will see you next one with a review, hopefully, if I can find the movie, of The Man from Nowhere. Take it easy.